If you've ever spent any time in shark internet land, you'll have probably at some point seen old photos of massive great white sharks like these ones, all of whom were found in the Mediterranean Sea. Over the years, it's led to the idea that Mediterranean great white sharks are built different. Bigger heads, thicker bodies, sharks that on camera seem to dwarf the boats and the people stood around them. Those old photos from Malta, Sicily, France and Greece feature sharks that look like they ate a normal white shark as an appetizer. And it raises an interesting question. Are Mediterranean great white sharks significantly bigger than other white sharks in different places around the world? But there's a bit of a contradiction here. The Mediterranean, historically and presently, is one of the most intensely fished seas on the planet, meaning its current white shark population is incredibly small, very fragmented, and by most recent estimates, critically endangered. Although despite all of that, some of the largest white sharks ever recorded come from this exact region. Now, this doesn't automatically mean this Mediterranean subpopulation is genetically oversized, but it could mean that there's something else going on. Something hidden about their ecology, or perhaps the sampling that's been done, may be altering our perception of these sharks. So in today's video, we're looking at this carefully, scientifically. No legends and no ancient Goliath predator storytelling, just what the scientific record actually shows us, and whether a handful of these encounters might have just been enough to create the illusion of giants. Welcome back to another Shark Bites episode, everyone. Now, I'm going to start here with probably the most important sentence of the entire video. If there's one thing that you take away from this, let it be this. Mediterranean great white sharks do not have to be genetically supersized for people to perceive them that way. There, of course, could be something about their ecology going on, but sampling bias and the kind of records we have are easily capable of shifting the scales a bit. And when we're looking at the Mediterranean record, it's weird. Historically, in places like South Africa, California, or Australia, researchers have had the luxury of being able to observe white sharks reliably and repeatedly. In these places, you get a full-size spectrum of individuals, juveniles, subadults, and adults, sometimes numbering in the hundreds. Whereas on the flip side in the Mediterranean, sightings and captures are insanely sporadic and heavily dependent on pure chance encounters, fishing activity, and mainly where people have got their eyes on the water. A major reconstruction effort back in 2019 compiled 773 records of these sharks in the Med, spanning all the way from 1860 to 2017, and found some pretty conclusive evidence of a strong decline in their population. Precisely, there's been around a 60% reduction since the mid-20th century, with declines varying across different locations and a real contraction in their distribution across the basin itself. And so when your data set is dominated by super rare encounters, you get what I like to call the giant filter. A 2 to 2.5 meter juvenile caught quietly as bycatch is unlikely to ever garner global attention, but when a shark pushing 5 meters plus gets hauled into a port, that becomes the stuff of legend. And yes, juveniles do exist within the record of these Mediterranean white sharks. There are plenty of documented cases of immature individuals that have been caught, and plenty of discussion of nursery areas in different locations around the Med. For example, the Sicilian Channel has long been discussed as a candidate nursery region based on frequent juvenile occurrences, large adult sightings, and several detections of white sharks within eDNA samples in the region. In recent years as well, there's been some discussion about the waters surrounding Greece and Turkey potentially being white shark nursery grounds, or at least an area where juveniles like to spend the first few years of their lives. This map here highlights several of those encounters, almost all of whom sadly were killed in the process of their discovery, but we've had juvenile white sharks in Paros and Naxos in 2014, 2020, and 2021, a juvenile in Evia, Greece's second largest island, in 2024, and then also over here in Kefalonia in 2024 as well, with August seemingly being the most common month for sightings. But I'm guessing you probably hadn't heard about those ones, right? And that's because the media surrounding this topic is fueled by the biggest and most dramatic cases. Now, a large amount of Mediterranean giants content comes from historical photos and second-hand measurements, and this can be a little bit problematic because a camera can make a 4.5 meter shark look like a 6 meter one if you do a few things. It can happen if you put it closer to the lens than the people in the photo, use a wide-angle lens, crop in really close, or remove any reliable scale reference in the photo. Historically, quite a few size reports we have for some of these sharks weren't reliably tape measured in a straight line from nose to tail. They were estimates, or measured in ways that slightly inflated the length, like measuring along curves or using partial remains and extrapolating. So even modern day researchers who specialize in this area and whom have respect for the historical record do have to treat it carefully, because a lot of extreme size claims shrink when you recheck anatomy, photos, or if you're really lucky, preserved samples. Saying all that though, I do want want to get one thing straight. There are some very, very big Mediterranean great white shark cases that crop up in online discussions. A widely cited cluster involves exceptionally large females, estimated around 6 meters and above, including the historically famous specimen from Marseille in 1925, which we don't have a picture of, but we do have this drawing here with an arms outstretched human for scale, and the size of the shark being estimated somewhere around 6.6 to 6.8 meters. There's also the near identical size shark reported from Filfla, Malta in 1987, infamously shown next to the boat in this picture, and then we've got other large females from Sicily and Halkidiki in Greece, again pushing slightly over 6 meters. Just quickly pausing for a second there, I probably should clarify a few things. The first is that those are estimates, which aren't necessarily fully authenticated tape measure totals, and extreme great white shark sizes are regularly debated around the world. Secondly though, even if a few individuals were really enormous, that doesn't mean the entire population is made up of bigger individuals. What it does mean is that the Mediterranean record contains some huge individual sharks, and so probably a better question that we could be asking is, why does the Mediterranean record overrepresent extremely large adult females? In great whites, females are generally larger than males. They're what we call sexually dimorphic, and the largest individuals documented pretty much anywhere tend to be adult females. So if your sightings are skewed towards adult females, your entire region looks bigger. There's several reasons why Mediterranean encounters might bias towards adults, and a couple that stand out for me, I would say, were mature adult sharks like to roam widely and interact with the kind of prey and fishing activity that generates records. And then juveniles might be using specific areas and be less often observed or misidentified or just simply not widely documented publicly. All those juvenile Greece sightings, I would say, is a good example of that. Interestingly, a 2017 review found a decreasing trend in mean total lengths for white sharks over a very long time frame, more than 150 years, which would suggest pressures on that population and a shifting size structure, meaning the med is likely losing or has lost those large individuals over time. So this idea of Mediterranean giants could be partially a historical snapshot that is amplified by how records are produced and by how people remember them. Okay, now here's where we get into the fun part, the plausible mechanisms for bigger sharks here, of which you can see on your screens now. If Mediterranean whites appear bigger, it could be one of or several of these, so let's have a look at them. One of the most consistent themes in the Mediterranean white shark scientific literature is their relationship with large pelagic prey, especially tunas. An awesome 2025 analysis of Mediterranean white shark records looked at where the hotspot shifts might correspond with changes in Atlantic bluefin tuna habitat and sea surface temperature, and they absolutely did, with clear patterns of white shark redistribution related to tuna feeding grounds and cooler sea surface temperature zones. The sharks in the med have been moving to the places that are more within their temperature range, and where the tuna have moved to. Historically as well, there's research in Turkey that explicitly linked the decline and distribution changes of white sharks with the decline and movement of bluefin tuna to different areas. So the prey base moves and the predator records move with them. Now what's tuna got to do with the perception of bigger white sharks? Well, tuna as a prey species are large, muscle-dense, energy-rich, and often are available in seasonal pulses tied to their migration across the basin. And so if your adult white sharks synchronize their movements with tuna availability, you can get brief windows where the sharks that people see or maybe even catch are bulky, well-fed individuals, which are also being seen more because they're concentrated near fisheries or hotspots where humans are present. So it could be these brief windows or snapshots that produce that absolute unit visual for these sharks. Next up then, if you listen to Mediterranean shark researchers, one region continually crops up when white sharks are mentioned: the Sicilian Channel and adjacent areas like the Gulf of Gabes. There's repeated records of great white sharks in these locations, which create concrete modern data points that show the species still occurs there. These hotspots can act like a little ecological funnel, where if the prey species migrates through, then the predators tend to hang out there as well. And if humans fish there, that's where you'll get encounters recorded. So even if the Mediterranean population was technically smaller in terms of their body size, if adult individuals repeatedly use certain corridors, then those few animals animals can end up dominating the record. Now, next up then, I think a rarely discussed driver here of that shark looked enormous is reproductive status. Pregnant females or recently fed sharks can look ridiculously bulky, especially in old photos where the posture of the shark exaggerates the girth of that animal. And the Mediterranean's most famous giant cases are almost all exclusively females. So a plausible explanation here is that the Mediterranean record disproportionately features large adult females that may have occasionally been laden with pups so they look larger, or they were photographed in ways that exaggerated their scale during times of the year where prey availability makes them look really well fed and bulky. No magic genes required. Speaking of genetics then, that brings us nicely onto our next plausible mechanism where we've got to ask whether Mediterranean great white sharks are genetically special. And so genetically, yes, they are, in the sense that they appear to be distinct and isolated relative to other regions, which would be consistent with a very small endangered population. But genetically distinct doesn't really translate to bigger body size. Body size is influenced here by a bunch of other factors as well, like prey type and availability, growth rates, survivability to older ages, and then human impacts too. It's not just as simple as saying this population has the big gene. To be fair, there are some out there that might be able to make a case that because this population has low genetic diversity, there could be some inbreeding going on, leading to specialized traits including their unique size, but I'd say that's more speculative than anything else. So why do Mediterranean great whites appear bigger? And here's my thoughts based on what the scientific record suggests. The rarity of the sharks here compresses the story. The Med has sporadic encounters and the population is in severe decline, so any few sightings or records of dramatic giant cases dominate people's memories and the media. Our perception of the record itself is biased towards adults, especially big females, because the most famous giants are large females estimated to be around that 6-meter class. Lots of high-energy prey like bluefin tuna can lead to bulky shark sightings, and there's plenty of evidence that connects these sharks to tuna distributions, as well as some cases where they've eaten a lot of tuna and can end up just looking thick. The hotspot geography that we mentioned funnels encounters of larger sharks towards fisheries, making them crop up more often in their records, and it skews that data set towards bigger individuals. And their genetic isolation makes the population unique, but it doesn't automatically equate to them being bigger because of it. There's plenty of other different factors at play. So the idea of Mediterranean giants isn't necessarily that the white sharks here are a different, larger-bodied breed. It's that the Mediterranean record, as we know it, is a highlight reel, and highlight reels can often be really misleading. And the thing is, I don't think the Mediterranean needs mythical mega sharks to still be fascinating. It's got a critically endangered, genetically distinct white shark subpopulation documented through scattered records across centuries. And the fact that we're still discussing their size is just partly because these days we see them so rarely. That rarity of them means we have far fewer chances to see the full size spectrum, and when we do get sightings, they tend to involve large mature sharks, often females moving through specific ecological bottlenecks tied to prey and temperature, but also the sightings are tied to human activity as well. In other words, Mediterranean great whites don't need to be giants to look like giants. But this is the kind of sad part and the bit that really matters. If the Mediterranean white shark population were healthy, if juveniles, subadults, and adults were all being seen regularly across the basin, the question that we pose today probably wouldn't exist at all. The idea of giant Mediterranean white sharks is in a lot of ways a side effect of their relative absence, which forces us to look at this species through gaps in the data. Sadly, we've reached a point now in this part of the world where a handful of extreme cases end up defining the entire population, which isn't a good sign. Now, you've seen some pictures of a fair few giant white sharks today, and if you enjoyed learning about them, then I bet you'll enjoy this video here. There's a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that's home to some of the biggest tiger sharks you'll have ever seen. So if you want to know why they get so big there, make sure you give this video a watch.